The period of time from the post-World War II era all the way to 1960 saw a significant economic boom. People had not only been celebrating the fervor of winning the World War, but also people had remembered the Depression and they wanted to kind of put that away, make it a distant memory. And the economic boom that occurred after World War II largely came from government spending and a Keynesian type policy. So the government, without getting overly involved in private sector matters, began spending money and investing money, getting people to work, promoting business, promoting taxpayers. Taxpayers, when there are more of them, when you have more people who pay taxes, you create more tax revenue. So the government has an incentive to make sure that more people are at work. One, it's healthier when people are at work, they feel more productive. And two, productive members of society pay into the system via taxes. It's a great combination. And at that sort, the government had been spending a lot of money on investments in schools, housing, veterans benefits, especially those who had served in the war. And there was a massive uh, interstate program that was going to come about here in a little bit. We'll talk about that in a few different slides. Otherwise, though, employment was low, about 5%, and you saw inflation steadily increase at a reasonable clip. So, economically speaking, about a 4 to 5% gain per year in gross domestic product is considered great. In the 15 years from 1945 to 1960, you saw about a 250% growth in our total gross domestic product from about 200 billion to 500 billion. Of course, you take inflation in mind with that, but even still, that's a significant increase. That's a really good sign for a healthy economy. And you have a few other different things happen. Of course, yes, you had that blip on the radar, the Korean conflict in the early 1950s that largely ended in a stalemate. But after that, you started to see other steady increases. After World War II, with so many servicemen coming home to factory jobs, they've been in the Pacific, they've been in Europe, North Africa, where have you. The Depression's over. Uh, People are eager. Let me put it that way. They're eager to put their doldrums and war behind them. They're going to have some fun. And with post war prosperity, better economic times, uh, a need for companionship that's now available because you're not getting shot at. Um, Birth rates in the United States steadily increased. Yeah. All right. Birth rates in the post World War II era steadily increased after they had largely declined and flatlined in the 1930s during the Depression era. They grew significantly post World War II. We know this generation as the baby boomer generation. Okay, boomer. You know, the popular internet meme and all that. Okay, boomer. Yeah, that's pretty significant with you younger folks right about now. Those boomers were born in the post World War II era, largely because of people returning from home and they had benefits and they had jobs and things were now prosperous. They could afford to feed their families. They could afford to buy things. They could afford to move about, have a car, have TV, other things. And so, because the population grew by almost 30 million people in a span of 15 years, you saw a rise in consumerism. You saw an expansion of the economy as you have more families that need things. They need houses. They need stuff to fill their houses. They need to buy more food, more good stuff. And typically they've got a little bit more money in their pocket. And so they're going to buy some things that they may deem as either being luxurious or just things that they desire. So you see more of a boom in that, creating a consumer demand. And then, of course, you start to build suburbs, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. And with the advent of the suburb, folks no longer need to live in an urban environment in a city. So during this time, there was a 47%, roughly about 47% increase in suburban populations To this day, they're still increasing. But really, beginning in the 1950s and 60s, you saw a rise of suburban America, um, where you see families with a car, a garage. You see housing, new roads. Think about Dallas, Texas as it is now, and where Richland College itself sits. Richland College is right in the middle. It's right on Abrams Road, Abrams and Walnut, where Richland or where Richardson and Dallas come together. Prior to its building, that was nothing but a farm field. There were agricultural fields. There was nothing there prior to the early 1970s. Now think about it. There's a huge neighborhood just north of Richland College, and Richardson, Texas surrounds it, and you have 635 to the south. None of that existed in the era that we're talking about in the early 50s. And so there had to have been a rise in suburban populations, and it was largely because of people having jobs, people having extra money, and a desire to live in a nice, quiet home in a suburb, that things really grew. So we'll talk in more detail about suburban growth shortly. Otherwise, though, people had more purchasing power. By 1960, people uh, on average had 1,800 extra dollars, and in 1960, that was a lot of money. You know, so think about it. If you had 20,000 extra dollars right now, what would you do? You can do all kinds of things with it. You can buy a car. You can pay your rent. You can um, go out to dinner, go for a drink. You know, you can do all kinds of different things with 20,000 bucks. Well, imagine people having that um, in their families. You can buy diapers. You can buy all kinds of things to feed your family and to make sure that you're prosperous. So, in general, this was a comfortable time from an economic standpoint for most Americans. Not all Americans, but for most. And so, from that perspective, it was interesting how that happened. And another segment of the country that really benefited from this era rather, was the West. You think about California as it is today. California in the spring of 2020 is the most populous state. There's about 40 million Californians. Pretty crowded over there. It didn't used to be that way, but it's pretty crowded. Um, the population out west in places like California and Arizona and Washington expanded. You have cities boomed. Of course, Californian cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco benefited from an industrial standpoint as they had many factories that supplied the Pacific Theater in the Second World War. Okay? But those things further grew. And to connect the West with other aspects of the country, not only did you have railroads and other things that had been built decades before that, but also you're going to start seeing more infrastructure projects align, more highways, military contracts going to California and Texas and places like that. Um, you also see an increased demand for cars around this time. I've always said that my dad, who was born during World War II, if he could pick any year to relive, he would probably pick 1957, and it wouldn't even be close. 1956, 57, somewhere around that era. He loves the cars at the time, and that's one of the biggest reasons for it. Music is the other. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But cars, like a 57 Chevy, that is like my dad's most iconic vehicle. Oh gosh, he loved those. And he loved all sorts of vehicles around that time. That's an iconic image, not just of my dad's idea, but an Americana, a 57 Chevy. The 50s vehicles. Cars became more and more affordable and more plentiful. And because you saw a rise in the number of cars, not only did you need to build more roads, but you also needed to control and produce more, more petroleum. You have a lot of gas, okay? So you're going to need more gas to fuel people's cars. And so around that time, you saw a rise in petroleum output. You saw more refineries. This is a golden age in Texas oil history. So Texas, to this day, Texas is a major player in the oil market. Now, as it stands here in the spring of 2020, oil prices have plummeted. Um, that's good for us as consumers in our pocketbooks, but it's not sustainable in the long run as producers are going to go out of business. So, otherwise, though, Houston, Dallas, Denver, they became oil towns. You go to Houston, Texas, and there are a lot of refineries around there, and that's an oil town. Well, a lot of West Texas oil. You see oil everywhere. You see new technologies that have emerged in recent years, which have been able to extract oil that had previously been unreachable. You can now break up rock and you can extract oil from it through shale. And so you see a boom, but it was really the 50s where Texas really started to get its fingers really crawled in. Even though Texas oil had been a thing for the better part of 50 or 60 years by this point, it really saw a big boom in the 50s. So that was another thing. You have a boom in oil because of cars and a demand for gasoline. You saw major investments in public universities, University of Texas system, University of California system. They saw a massive injection into their prosperity, and its effects are felt today. So you look at the University of Texas system, not just UT Austin, but the other UT system schools, they all benefit from investments that were made in the post World War II era, and they're all thriving. And of course, it's advanced to other systems as well. The Texas A&M system is thriving. The University of California system schools, Berkeley, UCLA, Irvine, Davis, they're all thriving. So the investment around those times were great. Now, another reason why the West was also popular and attractive is because of the weather. Let's be honest. Southern California weather is fantastic. You have beautiful weather pretty much every day. You have palm trees. You get winds from the Pacific that are cool. You have cool mornings and breezy, cool afternoons. It's having spent a lot of time in San Diego and in Orange County, places like that. It's easy. You don't even need an air conditioner. You don't need a heater. It's not like Texas in the summer where park yourself next to an air conditioner or else you're going to melt. That sort of a thing. So, yeah, you're going to have warm and dry, comfortable climates where every day the weather's nice. That's going to attract a lot of people. And so, LA, Los Angeles, saw about a 50% population increase from the World War II era until the early 1960s. And so you had a massive boom in businesses that were started around that time as well because of it. And speaking of businesses, um, because you have a lot of industry, factories, manufacturing plants, you also have a lot of workers that are parts of unions. So unions around this time began to expand. We had previously talked about the AFL and the CIO and how they had been rivals. They merged in the post World War II era. And they created a powerful union. And also, you have the United Auto Workers, that to this day has a major presence in the auto manufacturing system plants. And so, union membership to protect workers' rights really expanded in this era. And there had been various different accusations of corruption from various different union leaderships. You saw power change hands. Uh, the famed Jimmy Hoffa would eventually take control of the Teamsters Union in the 1950s. He would eventually be imprisoned, and then other things happened, and he disappeared in the 70s, supposedly. Otherwise, though, unions got a big boom in this era as well, especially as people came back to work in factories from the wars and things boomed. Otherwise, though, this was a very prosperous time in American history for most, but not all, but most Americans. Cars, oil booms, suburbs, you're buying things, you're having kids, okay? All kinds of things are happening. The 1950s, iconic American time.